Sometimes the names we forget are the ones we owe the most. One courtroom, one man in rags, and one judge who thought he'd seen everything until the name was said aloud. Let us know in the comments section below how you think the judge should have reacted, and stay tuned to see how this story unfolds. Michael Campbell didn't shuffle like the others did. There was no twitch in his steps, no darting eyes or mumbled apologies. He walked in with the kind of silence that drew attention, not because he was loud, but because he wasn't. Like a ghost gliding over concrete, he moved through the hallway of County Courtroom 3B with shoulders square, back straight, and a pair of broken-down boots that still somehow echoed with the weight of authority. The bailiff flinched when their eyes met, just for a moment, not fear, more like recognition, though it vanished as quickly as it came. "Case 3982C, the court clerk said, flicking her eyes at the man in cuffs. "Michael Campbell. Loitering, trespassing, failure to vacate." The judge barely looked up from his stack of files. Judge Harold McMillan was a fixture of this building. 22 years on the bench, and you could tell from the way he held his pen, tight between calloused fingers, that he wasn't impressed by much anymore. A man like that had seen it all: the addicts, the scammers, the violent, and the lost. He scratched something on the form in front of him, then finally allowed his gaze to rise. The man standing before him looked like a dozen others he'd seen that day. Gray in the beard, hollows beneath the cheekbones, layers of coats even though it wasn't cold. Another one wasting oxygen in the hallway of a system built to forget people like him. Judge McMillan rolled his eyes. "Is the defendant present?" he asked dryly, already knowing the answer. Campbell didn't speak right away, he just nodded, once, without breaking eye contact. The silence was enough to make the judge look again, this time longer. There was something in that stare. Something not defiant, not scared. Something calm, grounded. Not the look of a man asking for pity, but the look of a man who'd learned long ago to expect none. "What were you doing behind the Franklin Library?" McMillan asked. "I was reading," Michael answered. A small, disbelieving laugh came from the gallery. Maybe a public defender. Maybe someone just waiting for their turn. The clerk didn't bother to gavel it down. "You were reading?" McMillan said, amused. "Yes, Your Honor. In the alley, they throw away books. First editions. Damaged copies. I collect them." The courtroom didn't quite know what to do with that. McMillan sighed, set the file down, and folded his hands. "And when Officer Penner asked you to vacate, you refused?" Michael didn't blink. "I asked for 5 more minutes to finish the chapter." "The chapter," McMillan repeated, shaking his head. "Mr. Campbell, this is your 4th appearance this year. You've been cited for sleeping in public, panhandling, and now trespassing. This court is not a revolving door. You are not a tourist in the justice system." "I'm not a tourist anywhere," Michael said. That was when it happened. A beat. A name. A tone. The clerk leaned in to confirm the case file. "Michael A. Campbell, date of birth, January 19, 1971. Judge McMillan froze. His lips parted, as if he meant to say something, but nothing came. He stared at the name like it had slapped him across the face. Time stalled. For a second no one moved. Then slowly, McMillan reached for the file again, flipping to the 2nd page, then the 3rd. The clerk noticed. "Is everything all right, Your Honor?" McMillan didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the discharge date printed at the bottom of the page. U.S. Army, Honorable Discharge, 1996. And beneath that another line. Rank, Sergeant First Class, Unit 75th Ranger Regiment. Theater, Somalia. The judge leaned back in his chair like someone had knocked the air from his lungs. His fingers, still stained with the ink of bureaucracy, trembled faintly. He looked at Michael again. Not like a judge this time, but like a man trying to remember something he hadn't allowed himself to remember in years. "Did you serve?" the judge asked, softer now. Michael hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because the question was too personal for a courtroom like this. "I did," he said. "Rangers, 2nd Battalion, 89 to 96. McMillan looked down at his hands, then cleared his throat. There it was, the flash of recognition, like two soldiers spotting each other in civilian clothes and remembering what silence used to sound like under fire. Michael didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The room didn't understand what was happening, but something had shifted. The judge's posture, his tone, the way the clerk suddenly stopped typing. "I need a recess," McMillan said, standing too quickly. The clerk blinked. "Sir?" He was already off the bench. But before he reached the door, he turned back, his eyes lingering on Michael Campbell with a mix of disbelief, respect, and maybe guilt. The hallway outside courtroom 3B was lined with beige walls and bad lighting, the kind of place where time felt like it stuck to your skin. Judge Harold McMillan stood with his hands pressed against the cold marble of the washroom sink, his reflection staring back like a ghost he hadn't seen in decades. He didn't turn on the faucet, didn't move. He hadn't heard that name in over 20 years. Not since the Gulf had cooled, not since black smoke rose from Humvees left behind, not since the night a medevac lifted away the one soldier who wouldn't stop radioing for help while the rest of them were pinned down near the Bacara market. Michael Campbell. Not a common name, sure, but not rare either. Still, something in the voice, the calm, the stillness. That hadn't been coincidence. Not with those eyes. McMillan fumbled in his coat pocket for a mint, crushed it between his teeth to settle the bile creeping up his throat. He hadn't expected this. Not today, not ever. "Sir?" A voice broke the silence. It was the bailiff, shoulders squared like he was walking into a war zone himself. "Are you all right?" "Delayed the next case," McMillan said, his voice quieter than usual. 5 minutes. "Yes, Your Honor." He didn't wait for a reply. The door swung open behind him as he returned to the courtroom, his mind a storm of memory fragments. A firefight. Screams over a radio. A bloodied soldier dragging another one toward cover. He didn't want to admit it, but he saw it now. Those eyes. The same ones. Back in the courtroom, Michael Campbell sat without handcuffs. That had been McMillan's order during the brief recess. Let the man breathe. He sat upright, hands folded, the chains gone, but the weight still obvious. The courtroom wasn't as full as before. 1 or 2 observers, a bored reporter who hadn't realized the story brewing in front of her. She would. The clerk handed the judge a fresh sheet of paper as he returned to the bench. "Mr. Campbell has waived public defender assignment for the moment," she noted. "He said he'd prefer to speak for himself." McMillan glanced at Michael, who gave a small nod. It wasn't arrogance. It was self-possession, the kind of thing you only see in people who've learned how to lose everything and still keep their spine. "Well, then," McMillan began, his voice more measured now. "Mr. Campbell, I believe you said you were reading." "I did." McMillan tapped the edge of the gavel softly against the desk, a subconscious habit when he was thinking too hard and trying not to let it show. He looked around the room. "It may surprise this courtroom, but I used to read behind that library, too. A long time ago. There was a broken bench behind the maintenance door and a flickering bulb above it. Nobody ever bothered me there." Michael didn't respond, but his eyes softened just a touch. "You've been cited before," McMillan continued, "but you've never been violent, never combative, never refused to appear. I'm wondering, Mr. Campbell, what brought you here really?" Michael leaned forward just slightly. "Sir, with respect, I think you already know." That landed like a hammer. McMillan looked down, a crack of discomfort visible for the first time. He hadn't realized how loud the courtroom had been until it went dead quiet. The judge folded his hands in front of him. Where did you serve? Somalia, Panama, the Gulf, Balkans too, briefly. And your discharge? Honorable, after the knee was shot out in '96. McMillan nodded, his throat tight. 75th, 2nd Battalion, Fort Lewis. Do you remember Captain Eric Voss? Michael's mouth twitched. I do. He took shrapnel near Kandar. Should have bled out. Did bleed out, McMillan said. Died before evac arrived. I wrote the casualty report. Michael exhaled through his nose. Then, I suppose I remember you too, sir. The words weren't angry. They were just factual. Sharp as a blade that didn't need to be swung. It was the first time in years Judge Harold McMillan felt like the robe on his back didn't make him bigger. If anything, it made him smaller. Because now he knew why the name had frozen him. In 1993, he'd been a company commander, young, by the book, but not brave, not like Michael Campbell. There'd been an operation gone bad in Mogadishu, a radio cut out. One man stayed behind to make sure the last of the wounded got to the bird. That man wasn't McMillan. It was Michael Campbell. And afterward, McMillan had accepted a medal, a citation, for unit leadership during enemy contact. He hadn't corrected the record. He'd let the paperwork ride. He told himself it didn't matter, that the war chewed up the truth anyway. But the man who should have gotten that medal had just walked into his courtroom, homeless and arrested for reading a discarded book. Remember now, McMillan said. Michael gave the faintest nod. Takes time. For all of us. McMillan looked at the bailiff. Please return Mr. Campbell's belongings and cancel any pending city charges. The bailiff blinked. Sir, I'm exercising judicial discretion. Dismissed with prejudice. He's free to go. Michael rose slowly, not with triumph, but with dignity, like a man unburdened by what others thought he deserved. The judge stood too, removing his glasses. Mr. Campbell, he said, quieter now, I think I owe you more than that. Michael paused at the gate, turned back. No, sir, he replied. You don't owe me, but maybe someone else does. Then he left, without fanfare, without applause, just a man walking out of a place that hadn't seen him until now. McMillan didn't speak again for several minutes. The courtroom stayed silent, unsure if they had just witnessed justice or the unraveling of something deeper. And outside on the street, a homeless veteran stepped into daylight, not as a case number, not as a file, but as a man whose name could stop a judge in his tracks. Michael didn't look back as the courthouse doors closed behind him. The streets of the city had the same dull edge they always did. Grime on the sidewalk, steam from a manhole hissing like a slow exhale from the underground, and people who glanced your way without ever seeing you. But something was different now. Not around him, inside him. His back didn't hurt quite the same. His shoulders didn't sag quite as low. The name had been said, his name, in a courtroom, and it made a man freeze. He hadn't gone there today expecting anything but another citation and a quick trip through the revolving door of the justice system. A bench warrant, maybe. A fine he couldn't pay. But then, that look on McMillan's face. The split second when the judge remembered. That was worth more than food, more than shelter. Still, he knew the day wasn't over. He passed by a church on 9th, its white bricks streaked with soot and its cross rusting near the top. The alley beside it had always been his spot. 3 cardboard sheets under an old wooden pallet, a stolen wool blanket from a shelter in Spokane folded inside his duffel. But when he turned the corner, the space was already taken. Officer Penner stood at the mouth of the alley, one hand on his hip and the other casually wrapped around a cup of black coffee. His cruiser was idling at the curb, taillights glowing faint red. Penner was tall, built like an ex-linebacker, with buzzed hair and a habit of letting silence do most of the talking, except when it came to Michael. For some reason, the guy couldn't help himself. Well, Penner said, smirking. Thought you might slither back here? Michael stopped a few feet away. Didn't move. Didn't flinch. You followed me from court? Michael asked. Nah, Penner said, sipping. Didn't have to. You're a creature of habit. Michael's jaw tightened. I'm not breaking any laws standing here. You're loitering, blocking access to church property. You know they don't use this entrance. Penner stepped closer, not menacing, but enough to close the gap of power. I heard what happened in court, he said. Got the charges dropped, huh? Judge went all soft because you threw the magic word, vet. Michael's nostrils flared. I didn't throw anything, he remembered. Oh, I'm sure he did, Penner sneered. The great Michael Campbell, war hero, living in alleyways and lecturing judges. Bet that made your day. I didn't ask for anything, Michael said. You never do, Penner replied. That's the trick. You don't beg. You just stand there, quiet and noble, waiting for someone to feel bad. You think that makes you better than the other guys sleeping on benches? I think it keeps me human, Michael said. Penner's expression shifted. Just slightly, enough to show that something Michael said had hit home, or maybe a nerve. There was a pause. Then Penner leaned in, voice lower now. You know why I watch you more than the others? Because you almost look like one of us. Clean beard, old boots, straight spine. The kind of guy that makes people uncomfortable because he reminds them it could be them. You ever think about that? Michael didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence did it for him. Penner scoffed and backed off, flicking the coffee cup toward a trash bin but missing. It landed with a hollow thunk against the alley wall. You know what pisses me off? Penner continued. You walk into that courtroom, make the judge look like he saw a ghost, and walk out clean. And I guarantee you'll still sleep in filth tonight. Still piss in gutters. Still eat from garbage cans. What was the point of that little drama show in court? Michael took a slow breath. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Michael stepped forward. Just a half step. Enough to meet Penner's eyes fully. I wasn't trying to make a point. I went because the city keeps pushing people like me off the map. No warning, no notice, just a citation and an escort out. But today someone finally said my name, my full name, and someone who used to wear the same uniform I did finally saw me again. That wasn't for the judge. That was for me. That was so I know I still exist. Penner blinked. Then something shifted in his stance. Not much, but enough. His shoulders uncoiled slightly. His jaw unclenched. He turned back toward the street, ran a hand through his buzzed hair. I served too, he said quietly. Michael's eyes narrowed. What unit? 82nd Airborne, Iraq, Year 6, Fallujah. Michael nodded slowly. Rough rotation. Yeah, you. 93, Mogadishu. It doesn't get easier. No, Penner said. It doesn't. The two men stood there in silence. No more bark, no more threats. Just two soldiers who had found their way into the same broken city, wearing different armor now, but carrying the same weight. Penner cleared his throat. Look, I was out of line. Michael didn't answer. Penner tried again. That judge, he never freezes. I've been in his courtroom a dozen times. But when he heard your name, I thought he'd swallowed glass. Michael looked toward the fading light at the end of the alley. He remembered a version of me that mattered. And now? Penner asked. I'm trying to find out if that version still exists. Penner nodded. You get your things. Take the alley tonight. I didn't see anything. Michael gave a small nod. Thank you. Penner started walking back to the cruiser, then paused. You ever think about getting off the street? Using the VA? They still got lists, but I know people. I could make a call." Michael looked down at his hands. Dirty, scraped, but steady. "I'll think about it." Penner gave him a half salute, a real one, with respect folded into the fingers. Then he was gone, cruiser tail lights disappearing into city traffic. Michael stood alone again, but not invisible, and for the first time in years the world felt a little less cold. Caleb didn't run. Not in the way people think of running. He moved like he'd done this before, fast but deliberate, ducking through the side alley behind the diner and slipping through the hedge Ella and Gus had trimmed like clockwork for years. What no one knew, not even the regulars, was that the thick wall of shrubs hid a narrow trail, barely wide enough for one person, that twisted behind the tree line and curved toward the river bluff. He followed it without hesitation. The woods felt like shelter, like breath, like escape. Every step away from the diner was a step further from the people hunting him, but strangely, he didn't feel lighter. At exposure, he didn't want to leave. No, really. There was something in the way Ella had stood on that porch. The way she'd said, "He's a person." No one had ever said that with that kind of weight in their voice before. He'd been called a lot of things: subject, asset, liability, son of no one, but never a person. He heard the soft crunch of gravel ahead before he saw the clearing. Then came Gus's voice. "You move like a scout," the old man said. He was leaning against an old Ford Bronco that hadn't moved in years. It had vines growing up one wheel, but it didn't matter. They weren't taking the car. "We walk from here," Gus said, motioning behind the tree line. Caleb hesitated. "Where? To the cabin? No one'll find it unless they're born here or bleed here." "You bleed here?" Caleb blinked. "Not yet." Gus chuckled. "Then come on, we'll fix that." The trail opened into another stretch of woods, thicker this time. Pines instead of oak, the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that felt like protection. "You knew this might happen," Caleb said as they walked. Gus shrugged. "Ellen did. She always plans for the day things break. But she doesn't even know who I am. In council, she didn't care, not in the way they want her to." Caleb let the quiet settle between them again. He'd grown used to silence. But this one felt different. It felt earned. After nearly an hour, they reached the cabin. It wasn't much: wood beams, tin roof, chimney leaning slightly like it had been tired since '85. But it was clean, safe, tucked so far off the grid it might as well have been erased from it. There were solar panels on the roof, rain barrels beside the porch, and a well-worn rocking chair by the door. Gus opened it with a key tied around his neck. Inside, the place smelled of cedar and old books. A cot in one corner, a wood stove in the other, a shelf lined with MREs and canned chili. "You'll stay here till we figure out what's next," Gus said. Caleb stepped in. "She really set all this up?" Gus nodded. "Ella never said the war ended. She just said it changed uniforms." Back at the diner, Ella was already mopping the floor. The agents hadn't returned. Not yet. But she knew they would. People like that didn't just walk away. So she made a decision. She'd called a man she hadn't spoken to in 17 years. Captain Reed Garrison. Retired intel officer. Once pulled her out of a field op gone sideways in Helmand. Now he ran a security firm in D.C. that didn't advertise. "Ella May," his voice rumbled when he picked up. "You only call when the sky's on fire?" She told him everything, every word, every SUV, every unmarked badge and nameless agency. She even described the woman. Blonde, efficient, surgically cold. Reed whistled low. "You're dancing with black-butched ghosts. Then get me a spotlight." She looked out the diner window, watched a bluebird land on the sign. Sure. Reed moved faster than the suits ever did. By nightfall, a black van pulled into the back lot, unmarked but friendlier. 2 techs stepped out, one with a satellite rig, another with a laptop and a data wand. By midnight, the diner had eyes on every angle and enough digital shielding to confuse half the alphabet agencies. Heller didn't ask how he did it. He just brought them coffee. The next morning, the SUVs didn't come back. But something else did. A black sedan, government plates, 1 man inside. He walked into the diner at 7:03, sat at the counter, and ordered coffee. He was older than the others, gray at the temples. Soft leather gloves and a real badge, one with gold trim and a seal she recognized. Justice Department. "Miss Thompson," he said, sipping. "You caused quite the stir." She didn't answer, just poured him more coffee. "You're protecting a witness, one we didn't even know was still alive. Does he have a name now?" she asked. The man smiled faintly. "He always did. It was just buried under redactions." He slid a file across the counter. "Top cleared. Caleb's real name, birthday, birthplace. No longer a ghost." "We want to bring him in," he said. "But we'll do it right." Ella narrowed her eyes. "He doesn't trust you." "Keep shooting." "Not yet, but we'd like to fix that." "What changed?" "You did," he said. "You pulled him out of the dark. Hard to pretend he doesn't exist when someone's shining a light." That afternoon, Ella drove out to the cabin. Gus was chopping wood like the world still depended on it. Caleb was sitting on the porch, reading a book, one she'd left there years ago, The Things They Carried. When she walked up, he looked up and stood reflexively. "You're not in trouble," she said. His shoulders dropped, like a thread snapped loose. "They're offering you witness protection. New name, new start. Testify against the people who made you a project instead of a person." Told he didn't speak. She stepped forward, held out the file. He took it, thumbed through it. His fingers stopped on the last page. A photo. Younger him, smiling. Someone had loved him once, long before all this. "You can stay hidden," she said, "or you can be seen." Caleb looked at her. "Which one do you think I should do?" She smiled, that quiet, steady Ella smile that never wavered. "I think you deserve to be free." A week later, the diner was full again. Regulars returned, coffee poured, pancakes flipped. Ella moved through the place like always, a force wrapped in denim and quiet grace. She never told the story, not all of it, but every now and then she glanced toward the window, toward the booth where a boy once sat, silent. And sometimes a postcard would arrive. No return address, just a sketch on the back. The first one was of a bluebird, flying. The second was of a small cabin in the woods. The third, a courtroom bench. Empty, until it wasn't, because Caleb had chosen to testify. His words helped bring down a network no one thought could be touched. People who built a machine out of children's lives, exposed, dismantled. He had found his voice. And somewhere in a quiet Tennessee diner, an old veteran washed dishes with a small smile on her face. Because sometimes slipping a meal to a quiet boy was more than kindness. It was a rescue, with a revolution. It's the start of everything, and it ended with freedom.